couple seconds here as it hooks up.
Mr. Jordan.
We should be live now.
Perfect. Thank you everyone for joining the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club's City Council 9 forum this evening. We have a couple candidates with us, and I'm very thankful and it's an honor to have them with us. We have Joshua Clennon, Mario Rosser, and Kristen Jordan. Tonight's format is as follows. Each candidate will have 3 minutes for an opening, and then we will cover a variety of topics: housing, policing, education, and healthcare. For each question, candidate will have 3 minutes per response, and then at the end, each candidate will have 2 minutes for closing. The order of candidates has been chosen at random. We are going to start with Ms. Jordan, followed by Mr. Clennon, and then Mr. Rosser. So Ms. Jordan, I know that you just joined us, but you have the pleasure of going first. You have 3 minutes for your opening.
Hi, yes, I apologize for just slipping in. I literally just came off an Insta Live talking about what happened yesterday with the protesters at City Hall. For those who don't know, there was a lot of police aggression and mass arrests that happened with these protests on MLK Day, Black Lives Matter protests on MLK Day. And I'm gonna, go off of that because it's where my mind and my heart is right now. But a lot of my candidacy is about that. I am third generation Harlem. I am a outspoken abolitionist. I do believe in defunding NYPD and reallocating the funds to social services, affordable housing, green space. I ultimately am a woman of faith, and I have a belief in abolition, which a world without jails, a world without cops. Some of that has caused great controversy, but some of that has really helped inspire others. And what I want to see in Harlem is a refocus and a repurpose on radical love. And that's the mission of my campaign, to disrupt the district with radical love. We have been building collectively since 2019 to make change in Harlem. When I got in the race, it was because I wanted, it was after the jails expansion, which our city councilman voted for, de Blasio's plan for jails expansion. And I wanted to challenge that. And I also wanted to push for a different vision of a safer, more progressive, more communal, beautiful Harlem. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clennon, the floor is yours.
Thank you all. So my name is Joshua Clennon. I'm running for New York City Council in the 9th District. I'm a small business owner, community board member, and community activist. I was born and raised in the village of Harlem, and I still live and work in Harlem to this day. I'm running for New York City Council District 9 because my community is ready for bold new leadership and transformative change. What makes me best fit for the job is simply my lived experiences growing up in this community. I come from a working class family of Caribbean immigrants and Southern Blacks that migrated to New York City from Alabama. My mother's side of the family has lived in Harlem since her great-great-grandmother moved to Harlem from Barbados through Ellis Island with her mother in the early 1900s. My father immigrated to New York City from the birthplace of reggae, Trenchtown, Jamaica, with nothing to his name but a toothbrush and a pair of shoes in the 1980s. A couple years after I was born in 1995, my father was shot and killed walking home as he held me in his arms by someone who simply didn't like the way he spoke to them. My mom, bless her soul, she never skipped a beat. She worked day and night as a beautician to keep the lights on and raised me as a single mother. Despite all her hard work, there was never enough money. And we would often come home to eviction notices on our door. And a couple of times we were actually evicted. And I was sent to live in Jamaica for 2 years with relatives until she managed to land back on her feet. I've seen my community of Harlem change from a community of derelict buildings, vacant storefronts to become the trendiest neighborhood in Manhattan. Watching my neighbors be priced out of their homes and not be able to afford to live and retire in their community that they fought so long and so hard to save led me to get involved in community activism. I was appointed in 2018 to Community Board 10 as one of its youngest members and was elected treasurer in 2020. I ran for treasurer to spearhead our district needs statement and budget requests presented to the city council and borough president. I've advocated against luxury and overdevelopment of our community and fought hard for resources and funding for our local institutions. Professionally, I manage distressed low-income housing cooperatives, commonly referred to as HDFCs, to maintain long-term affordability, equity, and generational wealth for low-income residents in my community. We are about to face one of the largest fiscal crises ever that will require our city to make hard choices, but it also gives us the opportunity to make bold policy changes that can level the playing field for the many. It is our time to fight for a budget that reflects working class values, reform our city's approach to land use, save our small businesses, fully fund public education, and address the environmental injustices of our community.
Thank you. Mr. Rosser.
Thank you. And Josh and Kristen, hello, my brother and sister. Good to see you all on here. I'm Mario Rosser, and it's great to be here with you all. My mom gave me the name Mario, and it comes from ancient Rome. It means warrior. I believe that sometimes there's a lot to a name, and at the end of the day, that's who I am. I'm a fighter. I'm an advocate for those in our community who have not been prioritized. And that forms the foundation of my political convictions that every policy decision that we take must be rooted in the idea that we must make Harlem a neighborhood that is a great place to grow up in for the kid who's born into the worst socioeconomic situation in this neighborhood. Like Josh, I grew up coming home to eviction notices on my front door as well. And ever since then, it's been my mission to fight for the economic mobility of those in our community who are under-resourced. I've done that as a tech business manager at LinkedIn, where we work to create economic opportunity for all members of the global workforce. As a nonprofit leader for an organization called America Needs You, where we work with first-generation college students all over the city. And as a community builder and activist, I'm running for city council to make sure that we keep people in their homes, that we invest in youth development resources, and that we rebuild the economy in a just way, in an inclusive way that keeps Black small businesses open. Right now, I think there's more consensus than ever, political consensus than ever before, that we must move forward with a new vision and a new blueprint for our neighborhood and for our city, that we cannot seek to move forward by recreating the politics of the past. I believe that Harlem deserves energetic, solution-oriented, and visible representation. That's been my track record, and that's what I intend to bring to City Hall. Thank you all for being here today, and I look forward to having a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will turn to our first topic, housing. I'm going to start with Ms. Jordan once again. Ms. Jordan, you said when it comes to housing, that only massive investment in social housing and a homes guarantee will solve our housing crisis. A homes guarantee is a pledge that housing is not a commodity, but a human right. How do we go about guaranteeing quality, affordable housing? NYCHA is suffering from decades of federal disinvestment, leading to appalling conditions. And some council members, like Harvey Epstein, have introduced bills seeking to weaken HDFC protections.
Yeah, so the first thing we have to do to address it is change the narrative. Because the narrative right now is that New York is a right to shelter city and that people are entitled to shelter. So what we have is an investment in our shelter system that is mostly private companies, and we're not invested in actually affordable housing for everyone. We also are not looking at housing as a human right. So when I'm speaking to a homes guarantee, that's what I'm speaking to, the idea that housing is a human right and that we start pushing for legislation from that vantage point. So instead of a really developed shelter system, let's figure out how we put people in homes, house the homeless in homes, not just shelters. With that, I also have in 11 steps. I won't get to go through all the 11 steps, I'm sure, but I have an 11 steps to actual affordable housing in Harlem. So anyone who's interested in that, you can find it at kristenforharlem.com, and then go to public statements and it's listed there. But there's a bunch of things that I call for in the steps. Redefining the matrix so that we're looking at not the median income of the city, but looking by zip code. So we look at our local area and redefine the housing so it's actually affordable. What I said about homes guarantee is in there. Universal rent stabilization. Looking at a land value tax so that those who are right now profiting off of just holding buildings, just holding empty spaces. I mean, we literally just saw this with the Pathmark on 125th, that the companies are just holding the space and, you know, investing in it like gold and just letting the values go up, that we should have a land value tax that addresses that. So like I said, I won't get to go into all of my 11 steps, but there's a lot that we can do legislatively on the city council level to begin to address the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Simpson, welcome. We're currently in the midst of our housing topic here, but since you just joined, I'll give you an opportunity to do a 3-minute opening, after which we will turn to each subsequent topic. We'll have a topic of housing, policing, education, and healthcare. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to respond to a question under each topic, and then a 2-minute closing. I'll allow you the opportunity to provide a 3-minute opening if you wish. Ms. Simpson.
Good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to log on. My name is Sheba Simpson, and I am a candidate for New York City Council for District 9. I decided to run for City Council because I believe that my community has been underserved for far too long, and that there are questions and concerns that need to be addressed by people like myself who are not attached to large corporations, don't take money from healthcare providers, as well as those who are real estate corporations. My belief is that we have a strong community that needs strong representation, and I believe that I am that person because I have integrity. I've lived in this community almost all of my life, and I have a plan for getting better funding for schools. I also have a plan for better health care for our seniors, as well as low income and affordable housing. And I also have started a coalition for saving small businesses in Harlem. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. We're going to pick back up with Mr. Clennon under the housing topic, and Ms. Simpson, we'll get to you after Mr. Rosser. Mr. Clennon, you are on record saying the city does not do enough to ensure that New Yorkers have a pathway to permanent housing. Additionally, you said that the mayor's mandatory inclusionary housing program fails to recognize the developers who are really about making a profit are focused solely on profiting. How do we go about creating a pathway to permanent housing, especially if developers are reluctant to participate since they are focused mainly on profits?
Well, in terms of MIH has shown that it's been a dramatic failure, and many people like myself and housing advocates said this from the get-go, because MIH basically allows developers to come in with these mass rezoning proposals, which are mostly focused on increasing commercial space and profitability, and they offer very little affordable housing in return. While they, 75% of those units are usually luxury and market rate. And in addition to that, the developers, they literally plan and strategize to destabilize the 25% that they are creating for affordable housing. So that's a big problem that the city has not been able to wrap its head around. In terms of creating permanent income-based housing, that is definitely something that we can do if we can get the city to stop giving away public assets to developers for little to nothing. So the city has several different programs, such as the third-party transfer program, where the city literally takes public assets that it gains in foreclosure and then transfers those assets to nonprofit and for-profit developers. That public assets could be used to implement community land trusts, to create project-based Section 8 housing, which would be permanent income-based housing that New Yorkers desperately need. We do not need more developments with 25% rent stabilized housing. As we know, rent stabilized housing itself is not a permanent solution. These apartments will eventually be destabilized and to return to market rate. So we need to start thinking proactively. We need to take a strong look at the way that the community is utilizing our public assets. We need to create community-driven approaches to land use. We need to reform the ULURP process itself. But to do this, we need elected representatives who really understand land use, really understand the real estate industry, because it's very easy to get duped by these developers and their teams of lawyers who come in and want to sell you this idea that they're going to, increase affordable housing in our communities, when 9 times out of 10 it's just not true.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rosser, you said on your website, I'll fight tooth and nail for a community-driven approach to land development, focusing mostly on ULURP, in order to move toward a racially equitable and comprehensive planning that aims for... I'll repeat the question. You said on your website, I'll fight tooth and nail for a community-driven approach to land development, and this focuses on ULURP. My question to you is, what is a community-driven approach, and is that the kind of reform that ULURP needs?
Well, the first thing that I'll say is that across the issue of affordable housing, houselessness, it is all rooted in us not appreciating housing as a human right. We've commodified housing to the extent that we view it as something that people have to pay for and they don't necessarily deserve. In principle, my political convictions oppose that. And I believe that that's not a given when you look at representation. And so I think that's something that we need to make clear. In terms of a community-driven approach to land use, it's clear that we haven't had that. Too often, the real estate development industry holds financial influence over our representatives, which is a reason that I've just pledged not to accept donations from real estate developers. I don't want them feeling like I owe them any favors, and already they're coming out of the woodwork trying to gain favor. And so ultimately, we need to make sure that the community members are knowing when we have these hearings around new developments, that our leaders are visible and actively engaging them to show up and making sure that that drives the process. I don't believe that's what's been happening, and that's certainly what I stand for.
Thank you very much. Turning to Ms. Simpson. Ms. Simpson, you said that in the long term, the city must rehabilitate its public housing stock and rapidly develop more permanent income-based housing. What do you mean when you say that the city must rehabilitate its public housing stock? And how do we ensure more permanent income-based housing is given to our community members when so much of it already goes to developing new luxury units and high rises?
Thank you for the question. The community has to always take center. The people who have lived here and most of those people are working class. And in restructuring how housing is assessed and then given to others, we must find a way in which real estate agents or corporations understand that there are working class people who have a income that is based on trying to ensure that they have money to pay their rent, And so how do we do that? We make sure that the cost of housing does not take 26% of our the people in our community's income for the month. Um, Working with not only city council, but real estate agents and corporations that know, that believe, excuse me, in truly giving all of our community a living situation that is sustainable and that is inclusive, and that also the people who live within the community has a voice in how that money, how rent regulations are implemented, especially for marginalized communities like District 9.
Thank you very much. Moving right along, we're going to turn to policing. We're going to start at the top of the list again with Ms. Jordan. Ms. Jordan, trust between police and the community is low. And you mentioned in your opening how yesterday there was a clash between some protesters and police once again. This is on the piggyback of this past summer where we saw a number of clashes between police and protesters. So my question to you is, what can you do as city council member to restore the trust between the police and the community?
Well, at the risk of offending some people, I am going to address the premise of the question because I have to be honest in saying that I think the policing system itself needs to be dismantled, right? So when I say I'm an abolitionist, I mean it. I actually believe in a world without jails and without police. So in the meantime, when you're talking about trust, to me, it's not that, it's about accountability, right? So right now, police are not held accountable. They are not accountable to the community that they serve. So one thing that we could do in the meantime, and I've advocated for this, is have an elected civilian review board that has firing and suspension power over the local police. So those who are of the local community could actually fire and suspend local police officers. Simultaneously, while we do that to deal with like current police community relations and actually give power, because that's what it's about. It's a power play and we have to give power to the people. So actually give power to the community to be able to hold the local cops accountable. Simultaneously, while we do that, we also need to work to defund NYPD and fund sources, social services, things that address actually the root cause of interpersonal violence. Because what we have right now is we have, and I say this as a Black woman, I say it as a survivor of domestic violence, I don't say it as anyone detached, but what we have right now is we have interpersonal violence that then is compounded by violence from the state. So we have violence within ourselves, and then we have violence from the police. And we're responding to violence with violence, which we just passed MLK Day. We already know, King already taught us, it just leads to a night devoid of stars, right? That's the Martin Luther King quote. So we need to really envision, reimagine safety and envision a different world, a nonviolent world. And that's what I would advocate for as city councilwoman. I understand we don't get there overnight. Like I said, I'm a woman of faith. I understand it's not tomorrow, but these are the steps we need to start taking to build a different world.
Thank you. We are now joined by Mr. William Allen. Mr. Allen, would you like to give a 3-minute opening to introduce yourself to our constituents?
Let me unmic myself. Good evening, everybody. Hope everybody's had a great day. Sorry, I'm just getting on. I actually just learned about the event maybe an hour or so ago. So I apologize for being late. I don't know what was said because I just got on, but certainly I want to certainly thank the West Harlem Club. These clubs in our community play a historic and an important role in terms of how we as neighbors are civically engaged and politically engaged in almost any issue that we find ourselves in as a community, and particularly that our community is now in a constant change. it's even more important that organizations like this exist to educate our neighbors. I spent pretty much a lifetime in public service. As a young teenager, I found myself the first teenager appointed to a community board and got the chance to be the vice chair of that board as a teenager. And then a few years later, I was appointed as a trustee of a local school district, District 5 schools. At that time, it was 27 schools. And I became the president of the board. I served as the president of the board for 3 years of my 4 years as a school board member. And I remember in those days from being on the community board or being on the school board, part of my deepest concern was the notion of getting other young people involved, but certainly getting the entire community involved. That I thought that politics and civic affairs did not just belong to a few, but that it was a responsibility of all of us, and that our leaders were as strong as the community was strong. And when there was community issues, it was not only the responsibility of those who elected to lead the charge, but it was important for all of us to be educated and figure out how to work together and how to protect our institutions, whether it's one of our local hospitals, whether it was a library, whether it was a closing of a school, whether it was building more affordable housing, or just addressing many of the ills around quality of life. These are the kind of things that I have always deeply felt as a young person, and certainly as an adult. You know, the difficult part of civic life or politics is this not about running for office. A lot of the great work that can be done in our community, you really don't need an elected seat to do that. And that's why I always value those folks like Joshua, Clinton in particular, and others who serve on community boards, and they don't get paid, but they do some incredible work and they give up their time. And I just want to encourage more folks who really see service, that they know that there can be other things that they can do to bring about this difference, whether being on a county committee, whether attending a judicial convention, whether attending the state convention. There's so many opportunities by which we can build the infrastructure, the political infrastructure of our community, so we can effectively respond to the challenges that our communities are always facing. I think I got about maybe 30 seconds or a minute left.
Less than 15 seconds, excuse me.
15 seconds. So I'm going to end there. And hopefully, as we move on, there's some questions and I can further participate.
Absolutely. So thank you, Mr. Allen. The
You're
format
welcome.
will that be that we'll cover 3 more topics, and each candidate will have 3 minutes to respond to each topic question. Currently, we're on the topic of policing. Mr. Clennon, the floor is now yours, and here's your question. You discussed on your website the need for a more holistic approach to public safety so that we may address the rising gun violence and holding the police accountable. First, please define public safety, as the definitions can vary from candidate to candidate. And second, what does your holistic approach look like, and how will this approach address gun violence?
Well, I'll define public safety as our public officials who are, hired by the city to address concerns, issues, law enforcement, etc. I think we need to reimagine our public safety system. As chair of the district needs task force for Community Board 10, one thing that we included as a request in our district needs statement is for a non-police response to mental health crises. I think mental health intervention needs to be led by trained social workers and clinical interventionists who can lead first and try to de-escalate and diffuse situations so that we can prevent situations that we see too often, where police respond with lethal force against people who are just having episodes, people who need real clinical help and not a bullet in their back. So I think that is a big aspect of having a holistic approach. In addition to that, is having a police force that is accountable to not only CCRBs, but we need precincts who are accountable to their local communities as well. We have far too many shootings and killings in our neighborhoods that go unsolved, unresolved. People have this sense of distrust with the police because they feel that there is no accountability. We feel like when there's a murder in our community that police don't care, that they're not interested in it. I was speaking to people in public housing, and they said they call their precinct, asking their precincts to have more police presence because they're concerned with the shootings, they're concerned with the gun violence in our neighborhoods, and the police won't even patrol, they won't get out their cars. That's a big problem. NYPD in our city, they think they're above the law. They operate themselves as if they are a gang, and that's a big problem. We need to reform, reimagine the entire system. We need to change the culture of policing here in our city from top to bottom. And that does start with CCRB, giving CCRB their decision making, giving it weight so they can enforce their disciplinary decisions that they make, so that they can terminate police officers when they feel that an offense is terminable. In addition to that, we need to give the mayor and police chief less influence over the CCRB by reducing the number of appointments that they can make and increasing that from the city council. Those are just a couple of the things that we need to do. But in terms of public safety, it's something that needs to take course over several or more years. It's not something that we can accomplish in just one budget session, because it's one thing to just say that we need to defund and abolish police, but we need to have a plan of what is going to be what is going to be our public safety system moving forward, right? So we need to first work towards that, building consensus in local communities, going and having those conversations with local communities in terms of what we want to see in our communities, what do we need, how can we address those issues, and then really building a long-term plan towards implementing a new public safety system. It's not something that we can just do overnight and upend things, because people in my community are being killed. Their gun violence is up. Shootings are up 200% over the course of this year, especially through the pandemic. So a lot of people are surprisingly requesting more police. They're requesting more police presence. But it's not a problem that we can just throw money at and say, here, police need more money. No, we need to demilitarize our police. We need to get rid of NYPD surveillance programs that disproportionately target low-income Black and brown people in Muslim communities. But we also need to educate people on what we can do as a community to solve these issues. So those are my thoughts on public safety.
Thank you, Mr. Clennon. Turning now to Mr. Rosser. Mr. Rosser, as you heard from Mr. Clennon, there has been a spike this past year in violent crimes. My question to you is, what do you think are the causes of the rise in violent crimes? And two, if elected, what can you do as a city council member to address and reduce the number of violent crimes that we see in our community?
Thank you. And I just want to say hello to Brother Allen. Good to see you. I was with him last night. And one thing I love about this group is that we all see each other out, and I have love for everyone. When it comes to gun violence in our community, this is something that's personal to me. My own godbrother is facing charges right now for a shooting 3 months ago. People I grew up in the sandbox with from my earliest ages are literally sitting in prison right now due to charges of gun violence. So this is something that affects my family. It's something that I think about every single day. The root causes of violence in our community and gun violence are a lack of opportunity, a lack of youth engagement opportunities, economic opportunities. In communities where people are able to thrive and start businesses and be a part of vibrant youth programs consistently, and those are funded, we don't see the type of gun violence that we see in our community. it's no surprise that gun violence is up 200% because people are out of work. I think the opportunity for a city council member over the next several years, especially a city council member representing this community, to be a leading voice in the budget negotiations for investing in youth services and youth development programming. As an example, just this past June, in May, when it became clear we were going to have a huge budget shortfall and leaders started looking to the chopping block, what was one of the first things to go? It was the summer youth employment program. And then we spent all summer criticizing kids in Harlem for shooting fireworks. But that was the first thing to be up on the chopping block. Luckily, it got saved, but none of those things are guaranteed to be saved. We need to fight for those things, and not only fight for those things to be funded in an austere budget environment, but make sure the youth development programs are responsive and actually working for the youth. And so we need leadership and representation that's actually going to be able to bring young people to the table, build trust, so that we actually are putting dollars in places that actually deliver some value for them. And so at the end of the day, I believe that the gun violence in our community is driven by chronic underemployment, is driven by a lack of opportunity. And the greatest opportunity that a city council member has is to make sure we put our money where our mouth is and invest in youth programs and development initiatives that are underfunded. And that's what I would do if elected.
Thank you. Now turning to Ms. Simpson. Your website is devoid of any mention of policing issues. Our community has seen a recent spike in violent crimes, as we just discussed here. And there's also been a call for defunding of the police. And we've seen a number of clashes between the police and protesters. So what is your vision if you're elected as city council member to restore the trust between the police and the community they police, but also addressing the rise in violent crimes?
Thank you for the question. Yes, my website is devoid of anything about the police. However, my activism is always the paramount to who I am and who I have been as an educator. I have started a Black Lives Matter advisory board for my students. I've been out in the protests against police brutality. If you look at my social media, I am always a proponent to defunding the police and refunding schools because it is a priority. Policing in our community, as Mr. Mario has said, is devoid of any kind of accountability from the police department. And our community has been devastated not only by police brutality, but also the gun violence. I am a proponent of learning the right way to for gun ownership. I am a leader in getting women licensed to carry legal firearms, not only to protect themselves, but their businesses and their families. So there is always a right way to do something and a wrong way to do. And what we've seen in our community for generations is that the police do not engage with us in the way that they want us to engage with them. In order for there to be some kind of movement towards some progressive and positive relationships with the police department, there has to be an overhaul, and that it does need to be, the police department does need to be demilitarized. You can't fight against your the very people who pay your salary. We are the people that want protection. We do desire it, but we also have the capability of working with the police where we can also be accountable for our own community. So my plan would be for there to be people in the community who work with the department of the police department, in which they police the community together in a positive way. And as a city council member, I will definitely be one to say that the police department needs to be defunded, because a lot of their funding comes from overtime, and for their salaries, which needs to go back into the communities like ours that needs it.
Thank you. Turning now to Mr. Allen. Still with us? There we are. All right. Mr. Allen, you retweeted on December 28th about Khalif Browder and Lori Loughlin. The retweet discussed how she pled guilty to federal crimes and spent less than 2 months in prison, where Mr. Browder was falsely accused of stealing a backpack and spent 3 years on Rikers because he couldn't afford bail. The post ended with, "Justice looks different when you're poor and Black." Now, as a public defender myself, I'm well aware that most of those swept up in the system are poor and Black. What, if anything, can you do as City Council member to help spear change to this time-old narrative and help make the system more fair?
Thank you. That's a great question. I also want to say I would just want to show Matt, well, not Matt, respect. I want to say I really appreciate what Sheba said, and Christian and Mario and Joshua. All these ideas are all incredible, and I just want to thank them for having them. I think, and this is what I believe as someone who's been in this work for a long time, is when we look at the police department and we look at the Department of Corrections, we're not really blaming the right folks who's responsible for justice in our town. I'll give you an example. So for example, as we look at, I'm gonna go back to what's happening in terms of the prisons. The police department is not legislators. They don't make the laws, but they can make some administrative rules down from the commissioner. I think the way the police department is structured and how we look at it, we're not holding the right people accountable. I hear very little being said about the mayor is responsible to the police department. I hear very little responsibility to the city council that has a public safety committee. If the city council is the law-making body, why are they not blamed for how the police department behaves? It's almost like going to a school, and Sheba can probably speak to this, and you're blaming all the teachers, and you keep walking past the principal and not holding them accountable. You know, Christian, you're a teacher too. And so at some point, I think that we should be able to sit down and really look at the justice system from A to Z and determine the levels of accountability, right? So for the last 2 decades, I've been a district leader, and I've been responsible for electing nearly 100 judges to the bench. And as I'm interviewing lawyers to become judges in Manhattan, I have to look at their cases. I have to review their resume. We got to talk to other clubs, and we go back and forth. We negotiate so we can put the right people on the bench. Why is the police department not looked that way? Why do we only have one commissioner? Why can there not be a police commission? Why can there not be 12 members of a police commission that also have civic participation on that? And the same thing should be for the Department of Parole. So I think when we're talking about reimagining, I believe that we got to redesign law enforcement in New York State. Because the way it is designed now, it is designed to work against people of color, largely Black boys. And it will not change until we change the system and also begin to hold the city council and the state legislature responsible for how police officers behave in our city. Because if you notice in the news, everybody's always talking about, oh, the bad cops as a whole. Well, what about the Speaker of the Assembly? What happened to the majority leader in the state Senate? What happened to the Speaker of the City Council? Aren't they responsible? Aren't they the bosses? And so I want to be able to change the debate around who is really accountable. But more importantly, I want to make sure that young people and other folks get truly educated in terms of how the criminal justice system is structured, not only here in New York, but across the country. I think once we begin to do that, we're going to see the changes. And I'll end with this. Poverty knows injustice. if Harlem was the rich Black people, you can trust me, the police will treat them differently. Poverty attracts injustice. It attracts it, it attracts it, it attracts it. When you go to other communities, how people are treated based on their wealth and their income, they're treated differently. That's why when we had stop, question, and frisk, how our kids were attacked because they were viewed as poor, as having no political power. So when they were being attacked on 142nd Street and Lenox Avenue, my question back then was, well, who was in the city council at that time? How come the city council person from Harlem wasn't standing up to that? How come they didn't call the meeting and protect our kids? So that's what I'm saying. While there are bad cops, I think there's a lot of bad politicians who don't protect us. And that's my biggest concern.
Thank you very much, Mr. Allen. We will turn now to our third topic, which is education, starting again with Ms. Jordan. Ms. Jordan, on December 13th on Twitter, you said that when students speak, they speak the truth, and we adults need to step back and listen. Well, if we step back and listen, we will hear many students, sorry, I'm gonna mute that for a second, complaining that they have experienced major disruptions in their education over the course of this pandemic due to a lack of access to the internet and technology, instability at home, and differences in learning styles and other factors. If elected, what would be your push to address these issues?
So thank you. I appreciate the question. The first thing I want to say is that we had an education crisis before the pandemic. We had a crisis before this crisis, right? And I say that as someone who has worked in the schools and has seen it firsthand. And I have worked at Haran School in Harlem. It's on 120th Street. For those who don't know, it's those who are differently abled in that school. And we were, again, before the pandemic, not addressing differently abled students and different needs of students. I have worked in several other schools throughout Harlem and seen that there was a lack of access to technology, again, before the pandemic. And the root cause of all of this, I am just gonna say it, is capitalism. And that is one big difference I have to say between me and the others you see up here, because I am a democratic socialist. I do believe in the redistribution of resources and wealth. And so when I talk about education and reforming education, I actually talk about it in the sense of we actually have to address capitalist greed and actually take care of students as human beings, holistic human beings, which is why I advocate for an expansion of what's called a community school model that actually addresses the students, not just academically, but socially, emotionally, everything that's related to students' needs. That's why I tie my stance on education to my stance on abolition, to my stance on housing, because all of that we have to address the root cause of capitalist greed. And that is what leads to this two-tier education system that we currently have. I want to say I'm really grateful to have the support and endorsement of Tanisha Grant, who's one of the co-founders of the Harlem Laptop Project. And that's an initiative started not by the government, but just by people here in Harlem to get laptops to students in need. And it is a beautiful thing, but it is also just crying at the disparity that we have not addressed, that people are just from their own pockets chipping in money to provide laptops to students because they do not have the technology and the access. And that should not have to be on us as community members. That should be something that's a given. And there needs to be education for everybody, equal education for everybody. And that does mean actually redistributing the wealth.
Thank you very much. Turning to Mr. Clennon. Mr. Clennon, you said on your website that you will reform the Department of Education's procurement process to eliminate wasteful spending. What reforms will you push for, and where does the money go? And how much money do we realistically need for all this?
Well, we need a lot of money. The state owes New York City public schools billions of dollars that we still have not collected on. In terms of DOE spending, when you look at the DOE spends millions on outside contracts for private consultants, et cetera. A lot of money on, resources that don't directly benefit either our schools, our students, or our faculty per se. So we need to really take a hard look at that. As Kristen said, education is big business. Education is a really, really big business, and we have to really look at that from the city council level in terms of oversight, in terms of making sure that funding and resources are going where it's most needed in our school, in our city. Our schools uptown have long suffered from decades of underinvestment. And that's something that did happen before COVID. This is not anything new. It's no surprise that our students now, they're getting distributed busted laptops for remote learning, and the laptops don't even work. We have to really take a look at all these things. We need to look at spending to really make sure that DOE is using its resources effectively. Another thing, we need to have a cap on charter schools. In the state, we need to push Albany to make sure that they renew a cap on charter schools, because charter schools are taking over our public school buildings, and they're taking vital resources and space that needs to be maintained for our public schools, because our public schools cannot raise money like these private institutions can. So there's a lot of things that we need to do, but the biggest thing is really oversight. There's been very little oversight in terms of Department of Education spending. And we also need to take police out of our schools. School safety officers themselves are $326 million of DOE's budget. That's money that could be going to making sure that every kid who is trying to participate in remote learning has a working tablet, laptop, has access to internet. These are vital resources. We don't need to be spending money on police officers in school to further, provide opportunity for the school to prison pipeline. So a lot of these things we have to really take a hard look at. These things are not new. They're decades of systemic oppression and injustice in our communities. And until we get new leadership with an actual vision and practical solutions, things will continue as is.
Thank you very much. Perfect timing. Turning now to Mr. Rosser. Mr. Rosser, you say on your website, quote, "I will focus on increasing educational opportunities and youth development programs by working to secure funding for more career and technical education, CTE, and partnering with existing mentorship programs to expand and impact more lives." That sounds great. Currently, though, there's a divide between whether the mayor should control the city schools or whether the mayor should not control the city schools. So this plan that you have sounds amazing. Would that plan be better served under a city where the mayor controls the schools? Why or why not?
Yeah, well, number one, I think that at the end of the day, this is about making sure our kids get the best education possible. I have not made a decision on whether we need to continue around the mayor controlling schools. So I'll come back at a later time on that. But I can speak to my view in terms of career and technical education and youth leadership development funding. So often when it comes down to getting funding for schools and kids, when I talk to parents in the neighborhood, it's all good when it comes to the hard skills and things like that. But when it's about developing the personality of kids and developing their leadership capacity, people start getting a little bit iffy when it comes to the budget. When I think about what gave me the opportunity to be here with you all today, these were the mentorship programs, the character development programs that saved me. And I think that a big opportunity for Harlem's next representative to city council is going to be the biggest advocate for those types of programs. And sometimes it's not always going to be from taxpayer dollars. I think that there's an opportunity to look at the ecosystem of folks who care about these issues in our city to make sure that our public schools are getting the sources they need. I'm going to be a strong representative for public schools. I don't think there are enough charter schools or private schools to be able to educate all of our kids. And I think the foundation of a strong neighborhood and a strong city is a strong public education system. So that's what I stand for. But at a later time, I'll come back with a position on mayoral control of schools.
Thank you very much. Ms. Simpson, on your website, you list only 3 issues, one of which is education. You said we no longer can remain silent as our children don't receive the resources they are owed. What resources are our children owed? And if those resources haven't been provided to our children yet, what needs to be done in order to change that?
Thank you for the question. As an educator for over the last 22 years, I have experienced and I've seen exactly what all of my panelists have been speaking about in regards to the underserved communities in public schools, which are our Black and Latinx students. Our kids are owed an exceptional education. And when I say exceptional, I mean that their natural abilities need to be honed and nurtured, and so that they can manifest into the critical thinkers and talented people that they are. And how does that happen? By giving them the services that they need, especially our students who are differently abled. As a parent of a double disabled student who needs a lot of supports, we need to put more service providers in the schools. If a school says that they are able to have provide OT services, then that OT service provider should be there, boots on the ground, day one schools are open. We need guidance counselors, we need social service, social workers, and we need people who can teach our children about entrepreneurship as well as financial literacy. And so that's where the services need to be ingrained. Our kids already have resilience within themselves. They have the capability of doing the heavy lifting, of asking for what they need in education. We as the adults, and especially as potential council members, we must be the ones who push that initiative in city council to get that funding that goes back into public schools, so our children can get STEM programs. They can get again, literacy skills. They can get the social services that they need to address not only their differently abled abilities, but also their mental disabilities, because our kids are suffering from PTSD in the communities that we live in. And so again, those services need to be funded through defunding the police. You defund the police and you refund public schools.
Thank you very much. Turning now to Mr. Allen. The pandemic saw the increased need for childcare. Many parents relied on the schools to care for the children while they're at work. With many schools having to close or being forced to close during the pandemic due to the virus, and this potentially being an issue in the future, if you are elected again, how will you seek to address this crisis as it relates to childcare? Oh, you're muted. There we go.
Okay. Have a bad mic. Let me fix it. This is a great panel. I want to just say that this is one of the best discussions I have participated or seen in our community in a long time. And I want to thank the club again. And I want to thank Sheba and Christian and Joshua, and Mario. This is what Harlem needs. This is what Harlem needs. And this is long in the making. But let me just say this about parents and childcare needs. One of the worst things you can ask of a politician is to know everything. Let me repeat that. One of the worst things that we can ask of anybody in elective office is to know everything. So I'll just say this. I don't think there is enough engagement for our population to come to the table and thoroughly discuss the challenges that they're facing. Everybody's claiming to know their challenges and their issues, but nobody's really empowering them to come to the table and get the help that they need. I'll give you an example. When we look at police community relations in Harlem, and we got, sorry about that. We got community precinct councils where maybe 10, 15 people show up. They only have like a budget of a couple of $100. So how in the hell are they going to be effective in police and community relations when it's not even taken seriously? We got PTA, parent teachers associations in our schools. You know, who's resourcing them? Who's making them effective parent leaders so they can effectively advocate for their children on the ground? What happens in our city and around poor people is that everybody wants to talk for them and nobody empowers them so they can talk for themselves. I wouldn't want to be in a city council when someone think I have all the answers and I'm going to speak for everybody. I want to be that kind of person. And I think my colleagues, what I'm hearing right, they want to be that kind of person too, where we bring people together who's impacted by different things and let them speak for themselves. You know, parents, they're very capable of letting you know what their needs are. And everybody, when this pandemic happened, you know, it was not about this food insecurity. It was about where were their children going to go? And it went back and forth and back and forth. And there was like no ownership of it. So my point is, I don't know the answer. But I got to tell you this, I know who does have the answer, and that's in those parents. And we need to make sure that we put enough money and resources to help them to be effective parents, like the parents in Nassau County, like the parents in the suburbs of New Jersey, like parents in Westchester who are effectively able to speak for their children because they know where the resources are, and they're gonna not let you just speak for them. They're gonna speak for themselves. So my position is this: we must find ways that we can empower our parents to speak for themselves and to be accountable for their vision for their children. That's what I want to do.
Thank you. Turning to our final topic for tonight, going back to Ms. Jordan, we're going to turn to healthcare. On October 31st, you posted an article on Twitter that the virus is getting worse in Harlem and that Harlem residents need to be more vigilant. And as we've seen as time goes on, the pandemic is still a problem. Now a new strain of the virus is making its round around the world. There currently are no vaccine centers in West Harlem. What are your thoughts on that, and how do we change that if you are elected?
So I think that healthcare is one of those issues that it's basically like a barometer, right? So like we can see in the healthcare outcomes and in healthcare disparities, we can see basically how we're doing with almost everything else. And one of the things that my mother and I actually did an Insta Live on this topic, because my mom is an emergency medicine physician, trained at Harlem Hospital, works here in Harlem, and served during this whole pandemic, still serving, got sick, went back to work, still serving. And she's an example of what our healthcare providers are doing right now. But I think like one of the things that she spoke to in the Insta Live that she and I did together about healthcare in Harlem was that we see all of the disparities in the health outcomes that we have here. That's why we have higher rates of infection. We have a higher chance of death because it's all connected. So the old NYCHA housing stock, because we haven't implemented a New York Green New Deal and we haven't retrofitted NYCHA, right? That's related to asthma rates, which is related to death by COVID. So it's all connected, and we're going to need to address all the disparities across the board and really get the resources and the support to Central Harlem like period in general. Aside from that, yes, West Harlem should have a vaccine site. We should have a couple. We should also be looking at what can we do to connect with community where they are. And I think there are people who have great ideas about this, residents, healthcare providers, but also just community members. People at the food pantry where I have volunteered for the past 5 years have great ideas. And that would be a great site to give vaccines because you have people coming every week. So I think we need to start thinking about, yes, having more sites, but also think about creative ways that are really connected to our community to get the vaccines out. And we have to big picture address the disparities across the board.
Thank you. Mr. Clennon, nowhere on your website do you discuss healthcare. New Yorkers are concerned that with the numbers still high and new strains possibly coming into play, that the healthcare system is ill-equipped to handle the potential demands. What, if anything, will you do as council member to address the inequities in our healthcare system as it relates to our community?
Well, healthcare is actually an expertise of mine. I majored in health policy administration at Penn State University. I'm on the health committee of Community Board 10, led by the amazing Dr. Hazel Dukes. So healthcare in our community is something that I discuss, quite very frequently in terms of addressing the disparities that we see as a community. In terms of maternal deaths that we have from Black women who, bearing children, those figures in terms of our chronic diseases, in terms of diabetes, hypertension, all those figures, we see the disparities are quite clear in terms of Uptown and the Black and Brown communities. So my thoughts on that is we need to expand New York City Cares program to expand access to healthcare to more New Yorkers, specifically in Black and Brown communities. We need a task force for our city to investigate and really get to the root of why do we see these disparities in our community. We need to invest in our healthcare institutions uptown and New York City health and hospitals, like Harlem Hospital, and make sure that our uptown communities have the best healthcare facilities in our city. In addition to that, we have to continue to advocate for a single payer healthcare system for the entire state of New York to make sure that all New Yorkers have access to healthcare, because just giving access to healthcare, and people being able to get preventative healthcare, we will see a sharp decrease in a lot of chronic morbidities that we have in our community. In terms of COVID-19, what we're seeing right now is a lack of marketing, a lack of public strategy in terms of getting quality information and facts out about this vaccine that we have. We have a lot of people in uptown communities, Black and Brown communities, who are very apprehensive about taking this new vaccine. There's a lot of misinformation spreading on social media like wildfire, and the city has not invested in getting the information out there to our people. In addition to that, even making an appointment for the vaccine is not accessible to communities where people don't have access to the internet. Right now, you have to make an appointment online. And that's a problem for a lot of people. Everybody does not have access to internet. That's why we need a public broadband system throughout our cities to make sure that everybody has access to internet, and to hold these corporations like Charter Spectrum accountable, because they have franchise contracts with the city and they have neglected to expand into Black and Brown communities. These are big issues that we as a city council have to tackle. These issues, I can't tell you why they haven't been tackled before. And the fact that West Harlem doesn't have any vaccine sites is ridiculous to me. I can already think of a couple. There's a Rite Aid on 145th and Broadway. There's City MD. I mean, I don't understand, but here in Central Harlem, fortunately, we have 7 vaccine sites. But I don't understand why, there's a lack of planning, there's a lack of leadership, there's a lack of just common sense in our city leadership in terms of spreading resources in an equitable manner. It's something that we have to take a hard look at in the city council and really reform the way the city does business.
Thank you. Mr. Rosser, you just heard Mr. Clinton talk about the expansion of NYC Cares. What are your thoughts on expanding NYC Cares or a similar citywide program to those that are uninsured? Also, how would you guarantee poor and working class people have access to comprehensive health care services that are free at the point of care, such as reproductive care, mental health, dental, vision, and primary care?
You know, what we've been through in this community, the loss of life over the past year has broken my heart. I lost my own mother 3 years ago to lung cancer. She died at the age of 56. In the 2 years before she passed, she lost her brother and sister also to cancer. My grandmother has diabetes. The only reason my mom was able to live as long as she did after she got her diagnosis is because President Obama passed the Affordable Care Act and she was able to get some care. Here on the local level, there are still too many gaps in the system. We're trying to move the ball forward nationally, but clearly everyone still isn't covered. Here in New York, you have people who make too much to apply to qualify for Medicaid, but make too much or don't make enough to apply to qualify for Metro Plus. So we need to reform the program requirements so that we close the gap and we get everyone covered, not to mention making sure we get undocumented people covered. At the end of the day, I think we have a lot of consensus right now around making sure that we pursue equity in healthcare. And I think that there is going to be great consistency to be able to get some of that stuff done here on the local level and closing some of these coverage gaps. At the end of the day, we've been humble as a community, and you just need, sometimes it's simple as you just need representation who's going to fight for it day in, day out, keep the issues visible. And that's what I'm going to bring, because this isn't something that is an abstract issue to me. It's something that's caused me a lot of pain, and I think about it every single day.
Thank you. Ms. Simpson, your platform when it comes to healthcare is as follows. Our seniors need top-notch services and quality care. We can no longer wait to provide our most vulnerable population with the resources they deserve. I would add, though, seniors are not the only ones who deserve better healthcare. Many of our constituents are on Medicare and Medicaid. This doesn't exactly speak to quality healthcare. If elected, describe how you will push for better quality healthcare for all.
Thank you for the question. Healthcare is one of my paramount issues on my platform. I believe for our seniors, a lot of the people that I have spoken to in our community does not know about all of the services that they are entitled to. And that is one of the reasons why seniors were put at the forefront of my healthcare platform. However, as a mother of 3 children and a grandmother of 5, I understand that healthcare is across the board for all New Yorkers, especially those in our community. And so when I speak to healthcare, I look at the disparity that is within our community. Harlem Hospital is our central hospital, but oftentimes the people that I've spoken to, and even the few times that I've been to Harlem Hospital, I didn't particularly like the service that I was given. I didn't feel that there was a urgency to make sure that I was taken care of. Right now, as we're speaking, I'm fighting the flu. And when I had to be taken to the emergency room, Harlem Hospital was not the hospital I wanted to go to. I literally went down to Lenox Hill Hospital, and that shouldn't be. I shouldn't have to leave my community to go and get quality health care. And so when we speak to the disparity, we have to speak about the people who are in the healthcare system, and not only the doctors, not only the nurses. I'm talking about the people who sit on the boards, because their idea of good healthcare is how much money the hospitals are bringing in, and not about the quality of care that the people who are going into those hospitals are getting. Joshua, I think, spoke about maternal mortality rate. Black women are 12% more likely to have issues and problems during childbirth from onset of conception to delivery than white women. That should not happen. That should not be. The quality of our healthcare system needs to be addressed where from top down there is a reimagining, meaning that the person walking into the hospital who needs care gets the quality care and assurance that they are going to be given service or communication as to exactly what their ailment is and how to proactively mitigate it, not only through medication, but holistically. So it incorporates, it's almost like educating a child. Patients need to be spoken to with dignity, given the respect that they deserve and the services that they are paying for. And if they don't have the ability to pay, they still get top-notch quality care because they are a human being. We can no longer allow the medical field to put us at us against them mentality when at the core of us, we are a society that is supposed to build upon one another and give each other the assistance we need to be as whole as we can, physically, mentally, and financially.
Thank you. Turning lastly to Mr. Allen. The COVID pandemic negatively impacted communities of color, yet those communities were among the last to receive testing and other services. You said on your website that you have played a national role in responding to the crisis, yet West Harlem doesn't have any vaccine sites. What can you do as council member to ensure West Harlem gets the multiple vaccine sites that we need? You're on mute again.
Yep, I just turned it back on. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, so let's explain what my national role is so it's not confused with in terms of local activities. So I was the National Crisis Director for the National Action Network. On a weekly basis during the pandemic, I received anywhere from 300 to 500 calls a week, as well as emails, folks, largely Black folks all across the country that was in somewhat of a crisis or just needed social capital coordination. How does a council person address shortages or inequities that's in their district? Well, first of all, I would have raised the question of how these sites of facilities are going to be spread throughout the city and what can each district expect. So the assumption is we got 2 community boards, and you got a community board there in West Harlem, and you have a health committee in West Harlem. And I would think that the community board would play a huge role in terms of what's needed in that community and what's missing. And so if I was in the city council at the time of the pandemic, I would have immediately called a meeting with the joint boards that overlaps the district and discuss what will be the community approach to this pandemic. And what do we need to all do together to ensure that our folks are not gravely impacted by that, and making sure that we get our fair share of the city resources? Because you can rest assured the Upper West Side, the Upper East Side, other parts of Manhattan, I bet you they were covered. And I bet you they were not missing any resources or systems. And so I just think it goes to, when we don't have the money, at least we have the political will to come together and say, listen, we're missing this. When will it be delivered? Not that it's not going to be delivered, when it's going to be delivered. So you got great people, as Joshua mentioned, Hazel Dukes, who chairs the health committee on Committee Board 10. She is the state president of the NAACP, and she's also on the board of a medical college right there on 125th Street. In fact, that college has one of 3 pharmaceutical schools in this whole region. I don't recall who's the chair of the health committee on board 9, but I know Nye Whitaker is the chair of health on board 11. So it's a matter of getting these 3 health committees together and really come up with a solid plan in terms of how to address this.
Thank you very much. And that ends our topics for tonight, this evening. Now we will turn to the closing, and starting in the same order that we started this all off on, we'll start with Ms. Jordan. You have 2 minutes for your closing.
Thank you. I just want to close by speaking a bit about representation and experience, because it's something that has come up.
Sorry about that. We'll mute. Please.
Okay, I just wanted to close by speaking a bit about representation and experience. And, to admit that I don't have an experience of being a district leader for a decade or being a appointee to the community board. I don't have those types of connections to current status quo that like lead to what we traditionally call experience. But I do have experience being 3rd generation Harlem, being connected to the block, being an organizer, mobilizing literally thousands of people in the streets. And that's the kind of experience that I want to bring as a representative of the community, because it's not about any one person, it's about the collective. It's about what can we do to organize collectively? What can we do to be a community and all come together? And my experience being on the ground and being connected is I think a real asset, along with being a survivor, along with being someone who has been through a false arrest. These are things I see as assets that I can bring, something different, a type of leadership that we don't usually see. I also just want to talk quickly through my platform because I didn't get to do it, but my platform literally spells out Harlem in the acronym. The H is holding police accountable, A is actually affordable housing, R is redistribution of wealth and resources, L is living longer, it's a care package for Harlem seniors and also gun control. E is education for all and environmental justice, and M is meaningful change. And that's what my campaign is about, fighting for meaningful, lasting change, disrupting the district with radical love. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clennon.
I want to thank you all for having me, and thank you for all the other candidates who participated. I think I picked something from each and every single one of you, something that you said, so I appreciate that. And I hope that regardless of what happens in June, we all have to come together as a community and work together, because we all have talent, knowledge, something to add to our community. And we all have to work together to make sure that our community actually moves forward, that we're able to get equity, we're able to get investments in our community, we're able to get real affordable housing, real access to healthcare, real education, quality education for our students in our community. I'm running for city council because I was born and raised here. Many of the experiences that people have in my community that are experiencing right now, these have been my lived experiences. These have been the challenges that I face and overcome throughout my entire life. So I know them intuitively, and I've been working actively in my community ever since I graduated from college and came back home from Penn State to address these things in my community. I started out interning for my local congressman. I joined the Young Democrats of America, Manhattan Young Dems. I joined the NAACP, became a Next Generation Fellow. I was fortunate to be to apply and be appointed to my community board to expand on that work and really get into the nitty gritty of local governance here in New York City. And I'm hoping to take all of those experiences, my lived experiences, my professional experiences, working with housing, helping HDFCs in our community avoid foreclosure, maintaining quality and long-term affordability for our residents, and take that to the next level and apply it to real public policy in the New York City Council. Because that's what I think our community needs the most. We need leaders with real experience, with real solutions to the day-to-day problems that we face on a day-to-day basis. We don't need any more rhetoric. We don't need any more, lip service and all this talk about what people are going to do or what they think we can do.
Yeah.
We don't need leaders pointing to the sky.
Yeah.
We need leaders on the ground who know the pain of the people in our community and who are going to fight every single day to really address these issues. And that's what I'm hoping to bring as the next member of New York City Council to represent the 9th District.
Thank you, Mr. Clennon. Mr. Rosser.
Amen. And I want to thank you all for organizing this event tonight. It's been a pleasure getting this season started, and I'm looking forward to many more great conversations with this group and conversations that are on the ground. I spoke about my mother earlier. Some of my earliest memories in life were of her going out on the picket line, striking for better working conditions. She worked at a glass factory. She would come home and talk about the carpal tunnel that she was dealing with and the unsafe conditions. That was my first real exposure to the inequity in the system, just people going into unsafe conditions just to make ends meet and put food on the table as a single mother. Since then, my mission has been to fight for the economic mobility of other folks in our community, kids like myself, so they don't have to go through hell like I did just to make it out of a trap. I said 3 years ago, my mom passed, and my political convictions and values were more influenced by her than by anyone else. I'm running for city council to make sure that past this pandemic, we can keep people in their homes. We keep Harlem a mixed income neighborhood. I'm running for city council to make sure we invest big in youth development. I'm running for city council to make sure that Harlem is a beacon for Black small business ownership in the year 2030. This is our time. I don't know what Washington, D.C. is going to do, but I know here in New York City, we can take control of our community. I know here in Harlem on 135th Street, where I live, we can take control of our block. This is our time to translate the energy that has existed in the streets all year and making sure that we translate it into tangible public policies. That's been my record as a community builder. That's been my record as a legislative advocacy fellow. That's been my record as a partnerships manager at LinkedIn, creating economic opportunity for other members of the global workforce. That's been my record as a nonprofit leader working with students in a mentorship capacity. We have to stay activated. And I hope that I'm able to get the support of some people on this call to stay in touch with us. Text Harlem to 55444. Again, text Harlem to 55444 to stay engaged on our list. And I look forward to meeting you all in person, God willing, over the next few months. Be blessed and have a great night.
Thank you very much. Ms. Simpson.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone on this panel. I decided to run for city council because I truly believe in Harlem. There is no place like it on earth. I have not been everywhere, but I know that the vibe that I feel when I am in my hometown is like no other. And the people here have such brilliance and resilience that needs to be amplified throughout this city. And as a member of City Council, I intend to take the voice of my community there every day and fight for the needs of my community, for better funded schools, for healthcare for all, especially our seniors, and low and affordable housing, as well as maintaining the small businesses that we have and stopping the ones that are on the brink of closing. As a young person, I made a decision long ago that I was going to help my community to thrive and not just survive. And this is that moment. I am part of Harlem. I am the story of 90% of the stories in Harlem. I was a single mother. I've been homeless. You know, I've experienced a home invasion. I've had a sibling lost to gun violence. I've experienced being stopped and frisked by the police. I've experienced being in schools where kids wanted to learn and didn't have the resources. And I am a strong advocate for the underdog because I am the underdog. But I believe that Harlem is rising, and I want to be a part of that rising and bring my community with me to City Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And certainly not least, Mr. Allen.
Thank you. And thank you, neighbors, for sharing your experiences with all of us here tonight. I've learned something about each and every single one of you. And what I see most in common is a high level of compassion, a high level of love, and concern about a community that continue to be in need. As a senior person on the panel, does not mean senior in age. I just think I'm senior in preparation. I've spent my entire life in the service of this community. I mentioned earlier that I was the first teenager appointed to a community board. And as Joshua can tell you, we don't get paid. I became the youngest person to head up a school district in the state of New York. And in that capacity, I was not paid. In fact, most of my public life was without a government check to do anything. And so as you go around this community and you ask about William Allen, you'll find my story. And sometimes, you know, you don't get to know about it until you meet me or you meet someone connected to me. But I spent a lifetime working for Harlem. And it's not based on my pride or personal ambition. It's just based now in terms of what I know I can really bring to the table for this community, and also the relationships that I have built, because it takes key relationships to also bring those resources back to the community, being able to pick up the phone and speak to the Speaker of the State Assembly, being able to pick up the phone and speak to the Majority Leader of the State Senate, be able to speak to other council members in other districts, be able to speak to other folks in other parts of Manhattan. You know, as a district leader for a couple of decades, I'm proud of my record because I'm responsible for electing more Black and brown and women and folks of other lifestyles to be judges in our state. In fact, more of our people see a judge as a politician before they see a city council person, by the way. You know, I know how we can improve policing in our community. I know when Amadou Diallo was shot in the Bronx with more than 40 bullets, it was because there was a community council at that precinct that was dormant. Nobody was going to those meetings. No one was being engaged and talk about policing in that community. You know, as I said earlier today, our police and community councils, they're not even properly funded. You know, and so my life and my career has always been about being the great connector. Even as we look at programs like Cure Violence in our community in Harlem and the Bronx and Queens and Brooklyn, well, I wrote the first grant for that. And that was funded in Harlem, you know, and that wrote a lot of grants, you know, and sought a lot of monies for our community. And that's what's going to take. It's going to take knowing how to look at how our government is structured, being able to look at the budget in all the categories and determine what is our fair share. But more importantly, our job as civic leaders and those who aspire to be in elective office, we also must be educators. We cannot play Superman or Superwoman and think that you're going to solve all these problems. But there's one problem I know that we each can solve. And that is, we must have the capacity to bring people together so they can also be accountable for the change that they are seeking. Just imagine one day we walk into a community board meeting and it's a couple of hundred people who are volunteering to sit on all those committees that Joshua sits on. Just imagine we go to a monthly meeting at the 2-8 precinct or the 3-2 or the 2-6 or the 2-5, and it's not 7 women over the age of 70, but we see intergenerational participation. We see a real discussion about public safety and feeling not only feeling the discussion, knowing that our participation has made the difference. And I got to tell you, when Harlem was burnt up and boarded up, I was there. You know, with my pastor, Reverend Dr. Preston Washington, we created Harlem Churches for Community Improvement, and we won from the city a $200 million budget, and we call it the Bradhurst Plan, and we created affordable housing up and down Harlem. That's real work. And it didn't take a bunch of speeches to get that done. It took getting people to the table and getting to share a vision and then making that vision happen. Now, I know violence. Just like Sheba, I lost a sibling to gun violence. My own twin brother was murdered on 142nd Street and Adam Clayton Powell. On that particular day, he and I were supposed to walk together to that corner. But instead of me going to that corner, I went to Menacing and joined other kids that had another vision of themselves and their future. And because I chose to go in that direction, I'm here today. I'm here today, and I want to make sure that more of our young people have that kind of choice. So when we talk about Harlem, you know, people have been here for generations. Many of us have. I always like to ask people, well, name me the 7 friends that you had as a kid growing up in Harlem. Who knows you? You know, what schools did you go to in Harlem? What youth program did you grow up in? Who was your favorite teacher in Harlem? Who was the lady that ran the block association on your block? Was your parents involved in the tenant association? What was their civic life like?
Thank you.
Who were the heroes in the neighborhood at that time? And sometimes when we begin to ask these questions, we will find missing things from people's bios and their participation. So, you know, so let's keep it real. Harlem is about family and participation. And some of the greatest victories that I've seen that's happened in Harlem was not by people that was elected, but it was like 2 ladies like Nancy Bynum and Nancy Reynolds on 140th Street. One was called Miss Nancy of 7th Avenue. The other was called Miss Nancy of 8th Avenue. But these 2 ladies came together every summer and organized bus trips for the kids to amusement parks. Now, why is that significant? A bus ride to amusement park. Well, guess what? I was one of those kids that was on that bus ride. And because those 2 ladies chose to work together for that block, they saved lives. So I believe as civic leaders, as political leaders, we must create opportunities for other folks to lead, because our task ahead of us cannot be won by us, but it will be won by our community. That's why I want to be your city councilman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Allen. And thank you to all of our candidates today. You guys were excellent and participated in a very, very amazing discussion. I'm glad that we had it. It was very important. So I want to thank you, Joshua Clennon, Mario Rosser, Kristen, Jordan, and Sheba Simpson, and William Allen, all for your attendance. Thank you to the West Harlem Progressive Democratic Club for hosting as always. For those checking in, please check into our ACS education workshop on status crime, which is on this Thursday at 6:30. This will also be via Zoom. We also have our City Council 7 Forum, which is this Saturday at 1 p.m. And then last but not least, we have a parole town hall on January 26th at 6:30. Please tune in for those. Those are all important events. I want to thank you again to all of our panelists. I wish you the best of luck in the upcoming race, and I hope to see you all in the near future. Continue to be well and take care, everyone.
Take care.
Good night. And
Good
thank
night,
you.
everyone.
Good night.
blessed.
Thank you.
Good night, Sheba. Good night, Kristen. Good night,
Bye,
Mary.
Alan.
Joshua.
All right. Now.
I'll see
All
you
right.
guys on the trail.
All right.
last one to hang up.